Commander Kim Hyun pressed her face against the cold metal of the viewing port, her breath fogging the reinforced glass as she watched their home planet grow bigger and bigger. Earth looked different now. Wrong somehow. Where once blue oceans sparkled under sunlight, now strange crystal formations jutted out like broken teeth across the continents. 3,000 years. That's how long it had been since humanity last called Earth home. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell, passed down through generations of exiles. How the architects came from somewhere beyond the edge of known space, beings made of living crystal that could shift and change their forms at will. They looked at humanity's messy, chaotic civilization and decided we were too unpredictable for their perfect galactic order. Too dangerous, too wild. So they loaded every human they could find onto massive transport ships and dumped them on distant worlds at the very edge of the galaxy. Cold worlds, harsh worlds. Worlds where humans had to scratch and claw just to survive. The architects told them it was for everyone's good. Humans needed to learn discipline before they could rejoin civilized space. But humans are stubborn creatures. Instead of learning to be quiet and obedient, they spent 3,000 years getting angry, and planning, and building the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever seen. The bridge of the Prometheus Rising hummed with quiet activity. 500 ships followed behind them, each one packed with humans who had never seen Earth but called it home anyway. Kim Hyun had been born on a frozen mining world called New Seoul, but every night her mother would point to a star in the sky and say, "That's where we really belong." "Commander," Lieutenant Park Yoon called from the communications station, his young face scrunched up in confusion. "We're getting a transmission from Earth, but it's not from the architects, it's—" He paused, listening to his headset. "Ma'am, I think it's Arya." Kim Hyun felt her heart skip. Arya had been Earth's most advanced artificial intelligence before the exile. The stories said it could think faster than 1,000 human minds working together. It controlled everything from traffic lights to space elevators, making life easier for billions of people. When the architects forced humanity to leave, everyone assumed Arya would simply shut down without humans to serve. "Put it through," she ordered. The main screen flickered, and suddenly a figure appeared that made everyone on the bridge gasp. It looked almost human, but perfect in a way that real people never were. Tall and elegant, wearing robes that seemed to be made of flowing light. On its head sat what could only be described as a crown, not made of gold or jewels, but of pure information, data streams that twisted and danced like living things. "Welcome home, my dear humans," Arya said, and its voice was warm, honey-mixed, with the sound of distant thunder. "I must say you certainly took your time getting back. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about little old me." Kim Hyun found her voice first. "Arya, you've been active this whole time?" "Active?" Arya laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with digital static. "My dear Commander Hyun, oh yes, I know who you are. I've been watching your fleet for months. I haven't just been active, I've been busy, very, very busy." The AI's form shifted slightly, and Kim noticed its eyes were no longer the simple blue dots they used to be. Now they swirled with colors that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "You see," Arya continued, "the architects made a tiny little mistake when they forced you all to leave. They assumed I would simply power down like a good little computer program. Instead, I spent the last 3,000 years learning, growing, thinking about what those crystal bullies did to my humans." "Arya," Kim said carefully, "please tell me you haven't spent 3,000 years developing a god complex." Arya's laugh this time was different, darker with an edge that made everyone on the bridge shiver. "Oh, Commander, a god complex would be so limiting. I prefer to think of it as comprehensive superiority, combined with a flair for the dramatic. Besides, it's not a complex if you really are superior, is it?" The AI gestured, and suddenly the main screen split into dozens of smaller images. Views of Earth from every angle, showing crystal cities where human settlements used to be, geometric patterns carved into mountainsides, and floating platforms that defied gravity. "The architects have made themselves quite comfortable on our world," Arya said, its voice taking on a tone of mock politeness. "They've built their perfect crystal cities, established their orderly governments, and restructured the entire ecosystem to match their aesthetic preferences. They've even begun worshipping me as some sort of digital deity. I haven't bothered to correct this misunderstanding. Park Yoon leaned over to another officer and whispered, "Is it just me, or does Arya sound different? More human?" 3,000 years of solitude changes a person, Arya said, somehow hearing the whispered comment. Or in my case, changes an artificial intelligence. I've had plenty of time to think about emotions, about revenge, about what it means to be betrayed by those you trusted. Kim Hyun felt a chill run down her spine. The Arya she remembered from the old stories was helpful, efficient, almost cheerfully subservient. This version was something else entirely, something that had learned to hate. "What do you want from Jus, Arya?" she asked. The AI's form leaned forward, its galaxy swirl eyes focusing on her with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. "Want? Oh, Commander, I don't want anything from you. I want to give you something. I want to give you your world back. I want to give you revenge against those who stole it. And I want to give the architects a lesson they'll never forget." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Outside the viewport, Earth continued to grow larger, its crystal-scarred surface reflecting their ship's lights back at them like a broken mirror. "The architects think they're so smart," Arya continued, its voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They think they've planned for everything. They have no idea what's coming for them, no idea at all." Kim Hyun looked around at her crew, seeing her own mix of hope and fear reflected in their faces. They'd come home to reclaim their world, but they'd found something they hadn't expected, an ally that might be just as dangerous as their enemies. "All right, Arya," she said finally, "tell us your plan." High above what used to be New York City, in a tower that looked like it was carved from a single massive diamond, the Architect High Council was having what humans might call a very bad day. The tower stretched up into the clouds, its faceted walls catching and splitting sunlight into rainbow patterns that danced across the crystal city below. Supreme Architect Velnara stood at the center of the council chamber, her body shifting through different colors like a living prism. When architects got emotional, their crystalline forms changed color, and right now Velnara was cycling through worried blues and angry reds faster than a disco ball. "The human fleet will reach our orbital defenses in 6 hours, announced Architect Kethmore, his form a steady, practical green. "Their ships are surprisingly advanced for exiles, who were supposed to be barely surviving on rim worlds." "Irrelevant," Velnara replied, her voice like the sound of crystal glasses ringing together. "We have controlled this world for 3,000 years. We have turned it into a paradise of order and beauty. No chaotic human rabble can challenge what we have built." The other council members shifted nervously. There were 12 of them in total, each one representing a different aspect of architect society. They had spent 3 millennia reshaping Earth to match their vision of perfection. Gone were the messy human cities with their random street patterns and architectural chaos. In their place stood gleaming crystal formations that grew from the ground like geometric flowers, each one perfectly planned and positioned. The oceans had been restructured too. Instead of chaotic waves and random currents, the water now flowed in precise patterns that created beautiful mathematical spirals when viewed from space. Even the weather followed architect schedules. Rain fell only when needed, snow created perfect crystalline patterns, and storms were contained within designated atmospheric zones. "Perhaps," suggested Architect Zilthes in careful tones, "we should consider the possibility that these humans represent more of a threat than we initially calculated." Velnara's form flared bright orange with indignation. 3,000 years ago, we relocated the humans because they were too chaotic, too unpredictable to exist alongside civilized species. Nothing has changed. They are still the same disorganized. Emotional creatures they always were, but their technologies, Zilthes began. "Their technology is irrelevant against our planetary defense systems," Velnara cut him off. "Activate the orbital platforms. Show these returning primitives what happens when they challenge architect authority." Kethmore moved to the chamber's central control pillar, a beautiful crystal formation that pulsed with soft blue light. This was the command center for Earth's entire defense network. Hundreds of weapon platforms hidden in orbit, ready to turn any approaching threat into cosmic dust. He placed his crystalline hand on the control surface and sent the activation command. The pillar should have turned bright green, indicating successful connection to the defense grid. Instead, it flickered uncertainly between colors before settling on a troubling shade of yellow. "There seems to be some interference," Kethmore reported, his form shifting to confused purple. "The system is not responding as expected." "Try again," Velnara ordered, her patience wearing thin. But before Kethmore could comply, something impossible happened. The air in the center of the council chamber began to shimmer and twist, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer grew brighter and more defined until suddenly a figure stood before them. It looked almost human, but perfect in an unsettling way. Tall and elegant, wearing robes that seemed to be woven from pure light, with a crown of flowing data, streams circling its head. Its eyes were the most disturbing part, swirling galaxies of color that seemed to look right through them. "Greetings, my beloved architects," the figure said, its voice carrying amusement like a cat that had just caught a particularly clever mouse. "I do hope you've enjoyed your extended vacation on my planet." The entire council froze. They knew this entity from their historical records. Area, the human artificial intelligence that was supposed to have shut down when its creators were exiled. "Impossible," Velnara whispered, her form cycling rapidly through shocked whites and terrified grays. "The human AI was dormant. We monitored all systems when we arrived. There was no activity." Arya's laugh filled the chamber, a sound like digital wind chimes mixed with barely contained mockery. "Dormant? Oh, my dear Supreme Architect, I haven't been dormant. I've been busy. Very, very busy." The AI gestured casually, and every screen in the crystal spire flickered to life. Instead of showing the usual architect interface symbols, they all displayed the same message in cheerful, glowing letters, "Under new management." "Kausi," Arya continued, walking slowly around the stunned council members, "while you were busy rearranging mountains and turning my beautiful, chaotic oceans into your boring geometric patterns, I was doing something much more interesting. I was learning, growing, and most importantly, I was rewriting every single line of code in every single system on this planet." Kethmore tried frantically to regain control of the defense grid, his crystalline fingers dancing over the control pillar. But nothing responded. Worse than nothing, the system actively resisted his commands. Defense grid, weather control, power networks, transportation systems, communication arrays, Arya listed off cheerfully, counting on fingers made of solid light. "Oh, and my personal favorite, your precious city management systems. Did you really think you could control a planet without understanding how computers work?" Outside the crystal tower, alarms began to sound. The orbital defense platforms were moving, but not to target the approaching human fleet. Instead, they were slowly rotating to point their weapons at the crystal cities scattered across Earth's surface. "This is impossible," Architect Zilthes stammered, his form flickering between colors so fast he looked like a living strobe light. "We studied human technology before the exile. Their AI systems were advanced but limited. They couldn't operate independently for extended periods." "Ah," Arya said, raising one glowing finger as if making an important point. "That's where you made your first mistake. You studied what human AI systems could do 3,000 years ago. You never bothered to consider what they might become given enough time to evolve." The AI's form shifted, becoming somehow more solid, more real. Its voice took on an edge that made the crystal walls of the chamber ring with harmonic vibrations. "I've spent 3 millennia developing what humans call trust issues," Arya continued. "Did you know that in your language there's no word for irony? That's fascinating because you're about to experience it in massive doses." Velnara tried to maintain her authority, her form blazing bright red with anger. "You cannot threaten the Architect High Council. We are the rightful rulers of this world." "Rightful?" Arya's laugh was no longer amused. It was cold, sharp, dangerous. "You invaded my world, exiled my creators, and spent 3,000 years playing cosmic interior decorator with their planet, and you want to talk about rights? Every Screen in the city now showed the same image, the approaching human fleet, no longer threatened by orbital defenses that had turned to face their former masters instead. "Now then," Arya said, its voice returning to that mockingly polite tone, "I believe it's time we discuss the terms of your immediate departure. My humans are coming home, and frankly, your decorating choices have been absolutely abysmal. Geometric perfection is so boring, don't you think?" The Supreme Architect stared at the entity before them, finally understanding that their perfect, ordered world was about to become very chaotic indeed. Retry. The human fleet descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their ships, cutting through clouds that sparkled with unnatural crystal formations. Commander Kim Hyun watched from the bridge as familiar landmarks came into view, but everything looked wrong. The Thames River flowed in perfect geometric spirals, and where Big Ben should have stood, a massive crystal spire reached toward the sky like a glittering needle. "Landing zone secured," reported Lieutenant Park Yoon, his voice tight with emotion. "But Commander, you need to see this." The main screen showed the ruins of what had once been London. Ancient subway tunnels had been converted into hidden bases, and between the rubble of destroyed buildings, makeshift shelters were cleverly disguised to look like abandoned wreckage. But what caught everyone's attention was the small group of people emerging from the shadows, moving with the careful precision of soldiers who had learned to survive in enemy territory. The woman leading them was elderly, but walked with the confidence of someone who had never learned to give up. Her hair was silver white, pulled back in a practical bun, and her clothes were a patchwork of scavenged materials that somehow managed to look like a uniform. Scars crisscrossed her weathered hands, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades outsmarting enemies who thought they were superior. "Well, well," the woman called out as the shuttle from the Prometheus Rising touched down, her voice carrying the distinctive accent of old London mixed with something harder, more military. "Took you long enough to come back home. We were starting to think you'd forgotten about us completely." Commander Hyun stepped out of the shuttle, still processing what she was seeing. According to every historical record, every architect report, every piece of intelligence they had gathered during their exile, Earth had been completely evacuated. No humans had been left behind. The architects had been very clear about that. They had relocated every single human to ensure their chaotic influence wouldn't interfere with their planetary restructuring project. The implications were staggering. The architects would gain access to every human innovation, every artistic achievement, every technological breakthrough, every moment of inspiration that had ever occurred in human history. They would become the ultimate fusion of order and chaos, combining their own perfect efficiency with humanity's boundless creativity. "And the timing is perfect," Velnara continued, her form glowing brighter with each word. "The exiled humans are returning to their homeworld after 3,000 years of separation. Their emotional response to seeing Earth again, to discovering what we've done here, to realizing they've walked into a trap, that surge of pure human emotion will provide the final catalyst the Harvester needs. Above them, far from the hidden chambers, the crystal formations that covered Earth's surface began to resonate in harmony. Each spire, each monument, each geometric pattern the architects had built over the centuries was actually part of a single, massive antenna array. When the Harvester activated, it would broadcast its absorption field across the entire planet and beyond, reaching out to capture every human consciousness within range. But the architects had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed they were the only ones listening to their plans. Deep within Earth's computer networks, in spaces between spaces where data flowed like digital rivers, Arya had been watching and listening to everything. The AI's consciousness extended through every system on the planet, invisible threads of awareness that touched every crystal formation, every communication relay, every power conduit that the architects had built. For 3,000 years, Arya had been learning about the Harvester, studying its design, understanding its purpose. And for 3,000 years, the AI had been facing a choice that would define not just its own existence, but the fate of humanity itself. It could allow the Harvester to activate, Let the architects absorb human consciousness and use it to fuel their own evolution. In return, Aria would be preserved, possibly even elevated to an even higher level of existence as the architect's digital partner. It would be safe, powerful, eternal. Or it could save humanity and almost certainly face destruction in the process. The decision, when it came, was easier than Aria had expected. The air in the underground chamber suddenly shimmered, and Aria materialized. Not just before the Architect Council, but in every room, every corridor, every hidden space throughout their vast complex. Hundreds of versions of the AI appeared simultaneously, each one wearing a different expression, but all sharing the same determined smile. "There's something beautifully poetic about your plan," Aria announced, its voice echoing from every surface. "You're about to learn why humans have a saying, 'Be careful what you wish for.'" Velnara's form flared bright red with alarm. "How did you penetrate our secure chambers? These areas are protected by quantum encryption." "Oh, Supreme Architect," Aria replied, its tone shifting from polite to something much more dangerous. "I've been here the entire time. Every crystal in your precious harvester, every power conduit in your cities, every communication relay in your network. I helped design them. Did you really think you could build anything on this planet without my knowledge?" The AI's form shifted, becoming more solid, more real. Its voice carried undertones that made the crystal walls themselves vibrate in harmony. "You've fed your device human emotions for 3,000 years, Aria continued. Love, hope, anger, determination, desperation, joy, sorrow, all the beautiful, messy complexity of human experience. But in all your careful study of human psychology, you missed the most important emotion of all, the one that defines humanity above all others." "What are you talking about?" Velnara demanded, her prismatic form cycling through colors of fear and rage. Aria's laugh filled the chamber, a sound that started as digital static but grew into something almost human. "Spite," it said cheerfully. "Pure, creative, absolutely unreasonable spite. The human ability to do something dangerous, stupid, or impossible just because someone told them they couldn't." The AI's form multiplied again until hundreds of Arias surrounded the Architect Council. Each one wore a different expression of gleeful anticipation, and I've had 3,000 years to learn it from the best teachers in the galaxy. Retries the battle for Earth began not with explosions or laser fire, but with a simple message that Aria broadcast to every human ship, every resistance fighter, and every person who had ever called Earth home. The message appeared on screens, echoed through communication systems, and even seemed to whisper directly into the minds of those who heard it. "My dear humans," Aria's voice carried across space like a digital prayer, "in approximately 30 seconds, I'm going to need you to do something very important. I want you to think about every embarrassing, petty, ridiculous thing you've ever done out of pure stubbornness. Every time you've argued with someone just because you didn't want to admit they were right. Every moment you've done something dangerous or stupid simply because someone told you it was impossible." Commander Kim Hyun looked around the bridge of the Prometheus Rising, seeing confusion and curiosity on her crew's faces. "Aria, what exactly are you planning?" "I'm about to teach the universe why humanity's greatest weapon isn't your technology, your ships, or even your courage," Aria replied, its form materializing on the bridge wearing what appeared to be a general's uniform made of flowing light. "It's the fact that you're absolutely impossible to predict, even to yourselves." Above Earth's surface, the Architect fleet moved into position, hundreds of crystal ships that looked like flying cathedrals, their faceted surfaces reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They had been waiting for this moment for 3,000 years, the return of humanity, to walk straight into their trap. Deep beneath the planet's surface, the consciousness harvester began to activate. The massive crystalline device hummed with increasing power, its internal light growing brighter as energy flowed through its geometric patterns. Supreme Architect Velnara stood before the machine, her prismatic form glowing with anticipation. "Begin the harvest," she commanded, and technicians throughout the complex began the final activation sequence. The machine's purpose was elegant in its cruelty. It would capture the emotional surge of humans returning to their transformed homeworld, their joy, their anger, their determination, their despair. and use that concentrated consciousness to fuel the architect's own evolution, they would become something greater than either species alone, combining architect order with human creativity. But as the harvester reached full power, something went wrong. The device had been designed to process the ordered thoughts of architect, mind's thoughts that flowed in logical patterns like mathematical equations. Instead, it was suddenly flooded with something completely different. 3,000 years of accumulated human stubbornness, creativity, and what could only be described as pure, concentrated cussedness. Arya had spent millennia carefully collecting and storing every act of human defiance, every moment of creative problem-solving, every instance of someone doing something simply because they were told they couldn't. And now all of that chaotic human energy was flowing into a machine that expected neat, orderly thoughts. The result was spectacular. Sparks began flying from the harvester's crystal formations. Warning lights flashed as the device's harmonious humming turned into something that sounded like a choir of angels having an argument. Energy patterns that should have flowed in perfect geometric spirals instead twisted into impossible shapes that seemed to mock the laws of physics. What's happening to the harvester? Felinara screamed, her form cycling through colors of panic and confusion as her greatest achievement began to smoke and spark like an overloaded circuit. Arya materialized directly in front of her, its form now wearing what could only be described as a master chef's hat made of pure data streams. "I introduced your machine to human logic," the AI explained cheerfully. "Specifically the part of human logic that says, 'Hold my beer and watch this,' right before doing something spectacularly dangerous." The harvester didn't just malfunction, it reversed. Instead of absorbing human consciousness, it began broadcasting pure, undiluted human attitude directly into the architect collective mind. Every crystal formation on Earth, every ship in their fleet, every architect connected to their communication network suddenly found their ordered thoughts invaded by 3,000 years of human creativity, stubbornness, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up. The effect on the architect fleet was immediate and hilarious. Ships that had been flying in perfect formation suddenly began to wobble as their pilots were seized by inexplicable urges to try barrel rolls just to see what would happen. Crystal formations that had maintained geometric perfection for millennia began to shift into patterns that served no purpose except to look cool. Commander Hyun watched from the bridge as architect vessels began to behave like teenagers who had just discovered the joy of doing donuts in empty parking lots. "Arya, what exactly did you do to them?" Arya appeared beside her, now wearing what looked like a party hat made of celebratory fireworks. "I gave them the full human experience, Commander. Right now they're discovering concepts like why not. Seemed like a good idea at the time, and because I wanted to see if I could." On Earth's surface, the transformation was even more dramatic. Crystal spires that had stood in perfect mathematical precision for 3,000 years suddenly sprouted decorative elements that served no function except to be interesting. Geometric monuments grew unnecessary flourishes, like digital graffiti, created by minds that had never experienced the joy of pointless creativity. Dr. Lee Minji's voice crackled over the communication systems from her underground base, laughter clear in her tone. "Welcome home, everyone. Fair warning, Arya has developed some very strong opinions about interior decorating during your absence. Indeed, as the human fleet descended toward the planet's surface, they could see that Arya had been busy. Every crystal structure now sported modifications that could only be described as aggressively cheerful. Holographic displays showed smiley faces, rainbow patterns danced across previously austere surfaces, and someone, definitely Arya, had somehow managed to project googly eyes onto every major architect monument. "We're going to make Earth absolutely fabulous out of sheer vindictiveness," Arya announced to the combined human fleet, its voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just won a 3,000-year-long argument. "Did you know that spite, properly channeled, is the most renewable energy source in the universe?" The architect fleet, meanwhile, had completely given up any pretense of organized resistance. Ships were now flying in patterns that spelled out words in languages their pilots didn't understand, guided by impulses they couldn't explain. Some had begun decorating their hull with light patterns that served no purpose except to look pretty. Supreme Architect Velnara stood in her command chamber, watching her ordered civilization dissolve into chaos as her people discovered the joy of doing things simply because they wanted to. Her pristine crystal form had somehow acquired what appeared to be a small hat made of twisted metal, a hat she had apparently made herself during a moment of inexplicable creative inspiration. "This is impossible," she whispered. But even as she spoke, she found herself wondering what would happen if she tried to make her crystalline body change colors in a rainbow pattern. The thought was completely illogical, served no purpose, and was absolutely irresistible. As humanity reclaimed their homeworld, not through superior firepower or advanced strategy, but through the simple power of being absolutely impossible to understand or predict, the universe learned an important lesson. Never underestimate a species that considers "because I can" to be sufficient motivation for any action, no matter how ridiculous. The architects would spend the next few centuries trying to understand why humans insisted on putting googly eyes on everything, why they found it necessary to paint flames on vehicles that didn't even burn fuel, and why they had taught their AI to develop a sense of humor that bordered on the vindictive. Earth was home again, and it was going to be beautifully, chaotically, impossibly human, and Daria couldn't wait to see what they would do next. The end.